From the Weather Channel, a special presentation. Weather disasters kill hundreds of Americans every year. Property losses reach into the billions. In spite of modern technology, more accurate forecasts, instant communication, the threat of disaster hangs over our lives. Hurricanes, tornadoes, flash floods strike quickly and are gone, leaving us with shattered lives and with a new sense of our own vulnerability. Now, 5 great weather disasters.
At the heart of every disaster is the element of surprise. It is disaster's most important weapon, and frequently, the greater the disaster, the greater the surprise.
Well, when we saw the skies clouding up, we realized we were in for some kind of a rainstorm. And again, we had no forewarning that it was going to be a torrential rainstorm. So we moved our dinner plans to the inside of the cabin, and then it began to rain. I'd never seen it rain like that before.
Disaster is always an unexpected guest. Even with years of warning and a history of disaster, there are those who will deny the possibility.
You could see the dust rolling in. Some of them lasted a whole week. It didn't blow too much then for a while, and then when the next one come through, I just do about the same thing, only every time the one come through, it got a little worse than the one that was before.
Perhaps the warnings are misleading or misunderstood, or they're heard too late to take action.
I first learned about Hurricane Hazel when I went to the grocery store. I had noticed that we had been having winds and rain, and that each time we had that, it got worse. But when I went to the grocery store, somebody asked me if I'd heard it on the radio that we had a hurricane coming up named Hazel. And I said, no.
Today we have the technology and understanding to predict hurricanes, blizzards, tornadoes, flash floods. But even so, these disasters can be devastating. Warnings must be heard, understood, believed, and heeded before lives can be saved. This program is about 5 disasters. All were killers, all were foreseeable, and surprise played a role in each of them. Atlantic hurricanes come in cycles. For decades, there may be very few, or they may all hit the Gulf Coast states. Then there'll be decades of great activity and huge storms, and they may all hit the Atlantic coast. So someone who's lived on the coast for years may have seen only the benign side of the cycle. When the killer side finally shows itself, residents are in for an ugly surprise.
Well, during the whole decade of the 50s, we had this cycle where most hurricanes that affected the United States affected somewhere on the East Coast. And this is actually the only decade, you might say, of the whole 20th century where it has been that marked. We had 3 major hurricanes that year. In addition to Hazel, in 1954 we had Edna and Carol. And then in 1955 we had the twin hurricanes there that we hear a lot about, Connie and Diane, that did a lot of flooding in the Carolinas. Well, Hazel was a very devastating storm. We had not really seen anything like it in North Carolina, I don't think, before we had Hurricane Hugo anyway in 1989. And it was very devastating in that it took just about everything off the beaches of North Carolina and even a bit of South Carolina. There was a stretch of 170 miles, for example, where every pier was demolished. And in that same area, just about every beachfront house was destroyed.
Hurricane Hazel developed just east of the Windward Islands on October 5th, 1954. It grew in strength and size, moved west and then north, and hit Haiti on the 12th. An estimated 400 to 1,000 people died. Then the storm moved north toward the U.S. mainland with incredible forward speed. On the 14th, Hazel was just east of Miami. By the morning of the 15th, Hazel was hammering North Carolina. It was a Category 4 on the Saffir-Simpson scale. Leila Piggott lived in this house in Southport, North Carolina in 1954, right across the street from the yacht basin. She and her husband had operated shrimp boats and a processing plant in Southport for 13 years. But Mrs. Piggott had never seen a hurricane like Hazel. 40 years later, and still in the same house, she's a much wiser woman today.
When I really got really upset about this storm was the night of October the 14th. It just got terrible. It was continuous, and it just got worse and worse. Anyway, I lay in bed. My husband went to sleep. He couldn't have cared less, I think. But I listened to the radio and listened to the bulletins. And this was all new to me. I had never listened to anything like this before. And they frightened me, but I believed them because my house was shaking. It was blowing so terrific. I was awake all night long, pacing the floor, crying, praying, wondering what was going to happen. I really thought maybe we were all going to die.
Leila Piggott's own film of Hazel. Her husband went out into the storm to try to save their 5 shrimp boats moored just across the street.
Now, why he was taking that chance, I don't know. But he was not the only one. Other owners of boats were doing the same thing. I guess in a case like that, when your whole life is at stake, everything you've worked for all your life is going, you will go the length. But anyway, last time he went, the only building down there, a sea shifted it and caught his foot between a piling and that building. I couldn't see him. I lost sight of him because he was underwater. And of course I died when I couldn't see him. And then all of a sudden I saw him. And he swam and I watched him. He told me what happened. He said, "I won't go again." And I said, "Well, thank God." And he didn't leave me again.
As Hazel moved through Southport, the winds shifted.
It got to the sterns of all those dozens and dozens of boats. And they went everywhere, in the marsh, up in the woods, over in people's yards, knocking houses down, tearing up cars, anything they hit. It was disastrous.
Back in the 50s, a lot of the shrimpers and fishermen that time, they didn't have a lot of wealth. They didn't have insurance, for example, on their equipment or their boats. And many of them lost their livelihoods with Hurricane Hazel. Many of their boats were wrecked. A lot of the fishing piers, docks, packing houses, and so forth were just completely trashed by the storm surge that swept up the coast.
Jay Barnes is director of the North Carolina Aquarium and author of North Carolina's Hurricanes.
Well, most of the damage was focused on the Brunswick County beaches, where we had, again, about a 17, 18-foot storm surge. And many of those beaches were just completely swept clean. The cottages that were built there, most of them were not built up on pilings like they are today. The sand dunes were leveled, and many people who went back to find their cottages after the storm were surprised that there was nothing left but just a clean, empty beach. I do think that the geography of North Carolina puts us at great risk for hurricanes. Our coastline extends out into the Atlantic, particularly the Outer Banks. We have very large sounds, Pamlico Sound and Albemarle Sound and others that back up these barrier islands. And just a tremendous amount of exposure that our state faces puts us at risk for future hurricanes as well.
Hurricane Hazel packs a wallop all the way to Canada. The rest of Hazel's to Virginia. The western suburbs of Washington, D.C. Then spun across Pennsylvania and New York and crashed into Ontario.
I'm sure they were astonished, and I don't think anybody was prepared for the speed of movement of this hurricane. Now, a lot of times late in the season, we see that hurricanes do move pretty fast when they turn toward the north. But this hurricane, from the time it made landfall right near the North Carolina, South Carolina border on up into Pennsylvania and up into Canada. Part of that time it was moving in excess of 60 miles per hour.
The ground in the Toronto area was already saturated from earlier rains, and when Hazel approached Canada, the storm got some reinforcements.
Actually, there was a low-pressure system in the upper atmosphere that had been moving eastward through Canada, and the hurricane and that upper low sort of combined, and the energy of the two complemented each other and made it the hurricane actually worse, very likely, by the time it got up into Canada than it had been just before it got there.
Hazel hit Toronto with 50-mile-an-hour winds and 8 inches of rain. 78 people died in flash floods.
In Toronto, it was more devastating than any other hurricane that I know about. Now, Canada does indeed get the tail end of hurricanes out in the Canadian maritime provinces. A lot of these hurricanes that go up to the East Coast are still very powerful hurricanes when they get up to Nova Scotia and to Newfoundland. But to have a hurricane be devastating that far west, back as far as Toronto, that's the most powerful one I've seen there, I believe.
Hurricane Hazel was full of surprises. In 24 hours, it went from a Category 2 off the coast of Miami to a Category 4 in North Carolina. It tore through the United States at 60 miles per hour, dumped 10 inches of rain in parts of the Appalachians, and then hit an unsuspecting population in Toronto with the strongest hurricane they're ever likely to experience. In Southport, North Carolina, they're still talking about it.
And I really didn't know whether this house was going to stand the storm or not. I didn't know in what any minute the whole house would blow away. And of course, I thought of the fact that we may lose everything. But I was sitting here in all this anguish, seeing my entire life change. But it's something I will never forget. Nobody that was here that day and night will ever forget that storm. It was a nightmare.
That's a tornado, yeah, leaves. Yeah, it sure is. That's a tornado.
Tornadoes are rare events in an individual's experience, even in Tornado Alley. At any one location in Kansas or Oklahoma, a tornado may strike perhaps once in 2,000 years. So is it any wonder that the people shooting this videotape are excited and surprised? And more surprising yet, this tornado is ripping up homes and businesses in northern Pennsylvania.
This was the worst tornado outbreak in this part of the country in recorded history. During this outbreak, there were two very well-defined zones of tornadoes. One ran from Ohio into western and central Pennsylvania, then another distinct one occurred across southern Ontario to the north and west of Lake Ontario.
Stu Ostro was a forecaster for a private weather service in Pennsylvania that last day in May 1985.
This was a very well-defined disturbance in the atmosphere moving from west to east. We knew there was a terrible potential out of the system, but as we got into mid-afternoon that Friday, nothing was happening, and we were beginning to wonder what the outcome was going to be. It was right at that point during the mid and late afternoon that everything just blew sky high very quickly.
Look at it. Get downstairs.
This twister, shot in Hermitage, Pennsylvania by Ronald Alfredo, was the strongest and deadliest of the day. It was an F5 on the Fujita scale.
That's fantastic. Look at all the papers.
What Alfredo thought were papers flying through the air were pieces of sheet metal torn from a nearby building. This single tornado stayed on the ground for 47 miles, killed 18 people, and injured another 310. Meanwhile, 9 more of these killers were raging through the eastern Great Lakes region.
I'll never forget having worked that evening and been there to receive the reports as they came in, that this was typical of very bad, damaging tornado situations where it takes a little while to get a handle on the magnitude of the disaster. And I'll never forget working that evening and hearing the reports come in as each passing minute and hour went by, and we began to realize how bad it was.
In Albion, Pennsylvania, the damage was terrible. This tornado's path of carnage was 400 yards wide. It cut through the center of town and devastated 20 square blocks of homes.
Attention, closer! One more, one more, one more, one more! Easy, 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 easy! Oh!
9 people were killed in Albion. The outbreak lasted about 5 hours. A total of 88 lost their lives.
Even though this was before the implementation of the current generation of Doppler weather radars, this was a very well forecast event, and given that the tornadoes were on the ground for quite a long while, very effective warnings were able to be issued for communities in their paths.
But an F5 tornado is a killer. It destroys everything in its path. Unless you're underground when it hits, you are not likely to survive. That something in nature can be that devastating, that's the element of surprise in this disaster.
I think overall, the folks in the Plain States are probably better prepared to deal with a situation like this. But still, if there's an F4 tornado or F5 tornado heading for your house, you better have a plan of action and do it very quickly.
The third of our 5 great weather disasters. July 31st, 1976. The rain began at 6:30 p.m. 12 inches fell before midnight. The rain ran down the steep granite sides of the canyon into the riverbed below. In minutes, it created one of the worst flash flood disasters in modern U.S. history. The Big Thompson River cuts a deep, twisting, narrow gash through the front range of the Rocky Mountains, Big Thompson Canyon. It begins east of Estes Park, Colorado, and drops 3,000 feet to end just a few miles west of Loveland. It's about 35 miles of wild and rugged beauty, some of it so steep and narrow as to be uninhabitable. It was summer, tourist season. There were 2,500 people in the canyon that Saturday night in 1976. Afternoon thunderstorms are common here in the summer months, but typically the climate's dry and the prevailing westerly winds usually move the storms through quickly. But this was not a typical summer thunderstorm.
The mesoscale complex itself was stationary. The cells moved into the complex very slowly.
Charles Chappell was part of a NOAA team that studied the Big Thompson flood and published a comprehensive paper on it in 1977.
What was really unique is that in the summertime here, usually we have a westerly component to the upper level winds, and the thunderstorms that form over the mountains drift immediately off the mountains and out into the plains. But in this case, the steering winds were out of the south and southeast, so that the individual cells just moved northward along the ridges, and one cell replaced the other and followed the other. So you got this series of pulsating rains that essentially fell on the same part of the basin.
A meteorologist photographed the developing storm between 6:10 and 6:45 in the evening, but the Weather Service didn't realize the significance of the storm. There hadn't been a storm this bad in the Big Thompson Canyon in perhaps 500 years. Some scientists estimate it was a 1 in 10,000 year event. Deborah Watt's family planned to spend the weekend of July 31st at a relative's cabin in Big Thompson Canyon. They loved the cabin, a cozy A-frame nestled on the bank of the Big Thompson River. Husband Gary could relax and fish with 3-year-old Aaron and 7-year-old Cindy. Deborah could recuperate from the birth of their 3-week-old son, Sean. Deborah has written a book about her experience in the flood.
I was wanting and I was needing to just get away just for some rest and relaxation, but I just had a real eerie feeling about coming up the canyon. It was kind of a fearful feeling that I had, like something was going to happen. Didn't know what, but it was just very uncomfortable for me. When we saw the skies clouding up, we realized we were in for some kind of a rainstorm. And again, we had no forewarning that it was going to be a torrential rainstorm. So we moved our dinner plans to the inside of the cabin, and then it began to rain.
Within minutes, the rain poured down the sides of the canyon, and without warning, the river became a roaring torrent. Deborah Watts and her family were trapped in their cabin. Glass doors burst, and the room was filled with rushing water and debris. Deborah's arm was cut to the bone.
And then it was just probably not more than 5 minutes more that I remember glancing up, and the peak of the cabin still had the glass intact. And all of a sudden, I saw this wall of water coming towards the cabin. It was about 15, 16 feet high. And the water came, of course, towards the cabin, and the glass just exploded on impact. And then what I remember is the beams that, of course, supported the house just kind of twisted like licorice, and within seconds, the entire house caved in on top of us. The floor went out beneath us, and we were all a part of the current going down the river. The only family member that I was aware of was my 3.5-year-old son, Aaron, and I was trying to grab for him with my arm, the arm that had been cut, and he was reaching towards me, trying to grab my hand, and he was washed down the stream with the rest of the house.
Rescuers couldn't get into the canyon till the next morning. Deborah spent the rest of the night clinging to the side of the mountain, cold, soaked, bleeding, and in shock, the longest night of her life. Helicopters flew in and out of the canyon for 3 days. Hundreds of people were evacuated. Rescue workers found the bodies of 139 people during the next few weeks. Another 6 are missing to this day. The force of the flood ripped up Highway 34. Boulders as large as 10 feet in diameter were pushed downstream. The flood splintered and smashed cars, houses, campers, businesses. Deborah's husband, Gary, daughter Cindy, and baby Sean survived the night on the mountain. 3-year-old Aaron's body was found several weeks later, 20 miles downstream.
The measured discharge in the Big Thompson River that day, or that evening, was about 5 times that ever recorded prior to that night. So it was a monumental event, to say the least.
It was just white everywhere. That's the most snow I've ever seen. I was 14 at the time, and that was the longest days that we'd gone without having school, you know, because they couldn't remove the snow. They just couldn't get the snow out of there. It just snowed for 2 days straight, and it was just incredible. I mean, it literally snowed for 48 hours, and it just kept coming and coming. All the forecasts were like, well, it'll taper off this afternoon. It didn't. It went into the night. Then it went overnight, then it went the next morning. And it seems like I just never stopped shoveling. I made a small fortune during the blizzard of '78.
The Weather Channel's Jim Cantori was raised in Vermont. He had 2 occupations in the winter of 1978, shoveling snow and baseball cards. The proceeds from his shoveling enterprise during the blizzard bought the whole 1978 Yankee team.
You're talking snowfall rates of 2 to 3 inches an hour. And to see snow pile up that quickly and to catch people off guard was pretty amazing. And one of the things I can recall about this storm is it was very predictable. It was one of the few times that the computer guidance spelled it out.
I was working at American Airlines as a flight forecaster in February of 1978, and we had just gotten hit with a pretty bad storm in January. It was about a foot of snow at LaGuardia Airport where I was. Well, one of the things about this storm was we had a computer model that was really head and shoulders above anything previous to it. It was called the LFM. It started in, I think, the early 70s. I cannot remember a major nor'east blizzard in that part of the country that had been forecast accurately by any computer forecast, really nailed. This was the first time that the computer forecast, the LFM, really anticipated just about what happened ahead of time.
What happened was a snowstorm of enormous proportions. It shut down New York, Boston, Providence, Baltimore, and the rest of New England. It was an old-fashioned nor'easter.
This actually turned into a storm east of Florida and Georgia. It was never really over land. I can remember that the low center was always over the water, so it had a lot in common with a hurricane in that it was getting its energy from the water. It was over the Gulf Stream. The Atlantic, the warm waters of the subtropical Atlantic and the Gulf Stream are really what gave it its fuel. So I happen to be forecasting, and I'm looking at all this information, and I'm telling the dispatchers and the pilots and whoever needed my information, this looks like a snowstorm, and quite a big one, and there's no variation. I mean, the computer every run keeps saying we're going to get hit. So what they did was they got all the planes out of LaGuardia and Kennedy and even Newark. They just got all the airplanes out of New York City because they know they'd be stuck when this thing came in. And it worked. Now, as far as the general population goes around New York City, they got tricked because the storm in January was not forecast all that well, and they were afraid the forecasters were just crying wolf. So Monday morning rush hour came around, everybody got to work, and a lot of them couldn't get home.
The blizzard of '78 cost an estimated $500 million. Authorities say the storm killed 75 people. Snowfall totals throughout the area were staggering. The brightest white areas on this map received 20 inches or more, some as much as 40. And forecasters saw it coming 48 hours ahead of time.
And it was right there for everyone to read. But the believability factor, because people were pretty skeptical about believing that type of snowstorm back then, it wasn't there, and I think that's why it caught a lot of people off guard.
Even a decade-long disaster can catch us off guard. The Dust Bowl is next after this. These people were victims of the Great Dust Bowl of the 1930s. They'd come to the southern high plains looking for quick profits from the land. They were defeated by drought, wind, greed, and the ignorance of their times. The Dust Bowl was a disaster that did not rush down a mountainside or wash in suddenly from the sea. It crept in slowly like a cat stalking its prey. It was 35 years in the making, and even so, it caught its victims by surprise. The history of the Western High Plains can tell us a lot about the causes of the Dust Bowl. It is filled with similar defeats. The first known agriculture on this huge, high, hot plateau began about 1200 AD. Archaeologists call it the Panhandle aspect. These people created a sophisticated culture. They painted pictures, made pottery, quarried flint for tools, and they were accomplished farmers. They disappeared about 1450. We don't know whether they were routed by hostile tribes or a hostile climate, but we do know that they suffered one drought that lasted 24 years. The fate of the Panhandle aspect established a pattern of life on the plains. The Western High Plains lay deep in the North American continent, cut off from Pacific moisture by mountains to the west, from Atlantic moisture by the great expanse of land to the east, and often cut off from Gulf moisture by prevailing westerly winds. Throughout this area, only 10 to 20 inches of rainfall in a normal year. Windy, treeless, the summers are hot, the winters cold. Climatologists call the climate semi-arid, but some observers in the 19th century called it the Great American Desert. But in 1865, the buffalo still thrived on the western high plains, and eastern businessmen found a market for their hides. Buffalo hunters wiped out the buffalo. The United States Army wiped out the Indians. The whole process, the defeat of the Indians and the slaughter of the buffalo, took only about 10 years. By 1875, the buffalo were gone, and the high plains had become cattle country.
It was fashionable among wealthy Europeans to own an American ranch. With the labor and the cattle cheap, the grass free, there was no way you could lose. The profit seemed to be automatic and enormous.
Dr. Frederick Rathjen is a historian with the Panhandle Plains Museum in Canyon, Texas. He's lived in the Texas Panhandle all of his life.
Well, as it turned out, of course, these people knew nothing about the environment in which they were dealing, and there were lots of ways you could lose. Severe drought, severe winter, and as in the middle 80s, when those things came together, the impact upon the ranching industry was just devastation. Losses in some cases were as high as 80%.
In 1885, the cattleman's honeymoon ended. Drought hit hard. Prairie fires burned the dry grasslands and the whole herds with them. In 1888, the rains began again, and with it a tide of homesteaders with high hopes of farming, and once again, no knowledge of this fickle climate. In 1890, a 5-year drought started. The homesteaders picked up stakes and fled back east. 1896, and the rains came back. Land speculators convinced thousands of Midwestern farmers that the promised land lay in the high plains. Rain follows the plow was the current theory, and they plowed millions of acres of native grasses. They believed the climate had changed, and they bet their lives and their fortunes on it. It was the beginning of the great plow-up.
And there is just a certain strange historic coincidence here that generally speaking, as the first agricultural settlement became pretty significant, the rains came. Well, if the rains come, you do well. That bit of luck, and I'm not sure it was good luck, but in any case, luck certainly did mislead a lot of people into thinking that this was a permanent condition. And of course now we know very well that periods of ample rainfall or even abundant rainfall are followed by periods when the precipitation just isn't adequate. That's simply in the nature of a subhuman environment wherever it is found.
There are some theories that are on the table that the sun goes through like 11 and 22-year solar cycle activity. And since that's where most of the globe or the Earth's weather is driven from the star that's 93 million miles away, the sun, if there are any blemishes or anything that's going on with the sun, that could have an impact on the global weather pattern back here on Earth. So there are theories on the table that do describe periods of drought or extended periods of dry weather may be associated with those solar cycles of 11 and 22 years.
The next major drought wasn't until 1910. It brought the first of the dust storms, just a taste of things to come. Once again, farmers struggled and some were ready to give up, but the drought ended, ironically, in 1914. The rains returned, and World War I began, and the demand for wheat was overwhelming. European farmers were out of business for the war's duration, and it was America's duty to be the world's breadbasket. And in that same year, manufacturers came up with a practical tractor for small farmers. It was man and machine against nature. Farmers bought more land and the latest equipment on credit. They plowed and planted every acre of available land and sowed the seeds of the Dust Bowl. After the war, wheat prices tumbled, but farmers needed the big wartime profits to pay back loans for all that land, all those tractors. They plowed more prairie and planted more wheat, flooded the market, wheat prices hit rock bottom.
Now that really set up the southern Great Plains for some kind of ecological disaster, environmental disaster, if you prefer that phrase. Much of the promotion of the country, I should go back and say, was honest. It was not all hype, but much of it was. The point is, I think, that whether they were honest or not, they came with misconceptions and bad assumptions about what was agriculturally possible. Those things, combined with the demands of World War I and then the conditions of the 1920s, set agriculture in the Southern Plains up for some kind of a death blow.
The stock market crashed in 1929. Farmers on the Southern Plains were already in trouble. They'd been in a depression since 1920. When the rest of the country went broke, many people couldn't afford a loaf of bread made with wheat grown on the plains. The price of wheat wouldn't make the mortgage payment on the farming equipment, but at least there was still rain. Until the spring of '32. A late freeze, hailstorms, cutworms damaged the winter wheat. Then, drought. Huge farm operators went bankrupt. Small farmers plowed still more grassland, hoping to make up for shortfalls by planting even more acreage with wheat. Rain near Amarillo was hailed as a drought breaker in 1933. It was less than half an inch. The drought continued. Dust from Colorado to the Atlantic Ocean. After this, invulnerable. Whole fields and farms in western Kansas and Colorado began to move. The black rolling dust cloud was thousands of feet high and stretched as far as the eye could see. A north wind moved it south toward Texas. It smothered birds in the air, engulfed whole towns. The world turned black, and the black, its dust. The choking storm lasted 3 hours.
You could see the dust rolling in. You could see over the top of the dust was clear sky, but it was rolling in under it.
There are many people still living on the plains who remember that day and the many years of dust that followed. John and Edna Wick live on their farm near Umbarger, Texas. They were youngsters during the 30s, but they remember the Dust Bowl well.
When they come in, they usually lasted for, some of them lasted a whole week. Usually they lasted a day or two, and then they kind of cleared off, and it didn't blow too much then for a while. And then when the next one come through, I just do about the same thing, only every time the one come through, it got a little worse than the one that was before. Most of the time you just didn't go outside more than you had to because you couldn't stand it.
The drought continued. May 10th, 1934. This time the wind was from the west, Colorado and northwestern Kansas. The dust cloud rushed east with a top forward speed of 100 miles an hour. Within hours, the dust filled the air in Chicago. In the Midwest, the dust was so thick airplanes were grounded. 2 days later, the dust reached the East Coast and shut out the sun for 5 hours in New York and Washington. The storm swept 350 million tons of topsoil from eastern Colorado to the Atlantic Ocean. Millions of acres of farmland were destroyed. People thought the world was coming to an end, and for some, it was. Drought continued.
Basically, the weather pattern that sets up in the summertime months probably best represent what's going on that may establish a drought for a long period of time. And that's a big dome of high pressure, downward motion, which is not conducive for development of clouds and eventually precipitation. The Earth's atmosphere works on a cycle, the water cycle. Evaporation from what's on the ground up into the atmosphere. That condenses into clouds and eventually forms precipitation, comes back down towards Earth. Well, if you take out any one of those ingredients, then you've started the cycle of a dry pattern. So it kind of perpetuates itself. If you have hot, dry weather, any vegetation that might lead to
bring some of that moisture back up into the atmosphere. If that's absent, then you end up kind of cutting off a little bit of the water cycle there. Then because you don't have precipitation, the plant life, the vegetation continues to disappear, and eventually you don't have anything to put up into the air, and you don't have anything coming out of the air from the clouds. So the end result is you kind of perpetuate the system once it gets started.
But this drought was different. The suffocating dust storms were something new to the plains. The difference was the plow.
The only one that was used at first was the disc plow, the one-way plow, because with the old disc plow, it just powdered the top of that ground to where it just blow every time a little breeze come up, it'd start blowing, and of course, the stronger the wind got, the higher it blew. And then after they decided that wasn't going to work anymore, they invented the chisel plow, and it's the plow with the shanks on it and chisels that rips the bottom of the soil loose and throws the clods up on top to keep the sand from sifting across there.
The chisel plow was called the plow that saved the plains. As part of the New Deal, the federal government paid farmers from 20 to 40 cents an acre to chisel their land. But that wasn't until 1936. While the farmers fought the dust outside, their wives fought it in the farmhouses. Edna Wick remembers her stepmother's suffering.
See, we lived in an adobe house at that time, but I felt so sorry for her in the Dust Bowl days when this dirt would come rolling in, and you would not believe the silt that was collected on the windows and then on the floors. The silt would come in under and through the door frames. Pop would bring my dad would bring a grain scoop in, and we would try to sweep this up. Oh, it was horrible. Oh, Lord, why don't send us some rain? And I know, you know, everybody was praying for rain, but I guess it just had to get this storm out of the system. But it would go on for, it seemed like years and years.
By July of 1934, the drought covered almost half the United States. People on the farms were starving. Federal emergency relief programs supported 1.5 million individuals in the Dust Bowl region. Ranchers fed their starving cattle ground up tumbleweed. The animals were dying of thirst, their lungs clogged with dirt and mud. Thousands had to be shot. The drought continued. People got dust pneumonia and other respiratory diseases, corneal ulcers and eye infections. Even the tumbleweed and the jackrabbits died. Dust blew for 30 consecutive days at Amarillo. More dirt blew in the last week of March of that year than was removed in 7 years of digging the Panama Canal. 3.5 million Plains people abandoned their farms in the 30s. One writer called them a generation of human tumbleweeds. Most of them moved to the West Coast. No dust storms there, no jobs either, and not much of a welcome. But some plainsmen figured out how to beat the dust and the drought. They grew feed crops and raised cattle and hogs. They didn't depend on wheat. Both Edna and John Wick's families stuck it out.
Well, I really don't know for sure, but I would say that they were just too stubborn to get out of it. They were going to ride it out, and they did. No, I don't think we'll ever have another one like it, but we still have dust at times, but we won't have another one like it.
I think it's unlikely. For example, the 5 years following 1951 were drier than any comparable period in the 1930s. In those 1950s years, there were some dust storms, but there was nothing like a dust bowl. Now that says that some things had happened to teach people something, and people had learned. Which is not to say, of course, that it simply can't happen. I think any historian learns that one never says never.
great weather disasters: a hurricane, a tornado outbreak, a flash flood, a blizzard, and a drought. All were foreseeable, yet all contained the element of surprise. No one chooses to be the victim of a disaster. No one believes he will be. Perhaps we think we can ride out the hurricane, outrun the tornado, swim through the flash flood, or if we destroy the land, just move on to another. Maybe the biggest surprise in the disaster is our own vulnerability.